All right, I'm Cole Carlson, and I'm presenting Samuel Langley in how his life was. So, his early life, he was born in 1834 in Roxbury, Massachusetts. He started his education at Boston Latin School in his early times, and during this time, he got really interested in astronomy, which is what he did for a large portion of his life. So a little later on, with the help of his brother, he actually built some astronomical instruments to observe like phases of Venus, the craters, and all that on the moon, and then a lot of the moons of Jupiter and the rings of Saturn, all while he was still a kid and a teenager. Uh, After school, well, he graduated from Boston High School, but his experience in astronomy didn't really get him a job anywhere. Early on after he got out. So because of this, because of his experience with tools and his hands-on work, he thought an architect would be pretty good. So he headed out west to St. Louis and Chicago to do that. So we got some mechanical skills. He got good at drawing, which would help him later on with his sketches. But he didn't really enjoy what he was doing. So he went back to Massachusetts and he started to build telescopes with his brother for a job. And so, little times after this, he wanted to learn more about astronomy. So he left for Europe to just visit the museums there and the institutions. While he was also there, he became really fluent in French and he just kept speaking it for essentially his whole life. So he just kept with that. Then, when he got back from Europe, he became an assistant at the Harvard College Observatory for about a year. And then after that, he went to the Naval Academy where he was hired as a math professor. But the main reason they hired him was so he could just tend to their observatory. But then after that, he ended up at Western University of Pennsylvania and he worked at the Allegheny Observatory, which was very poorly equipped. But he was there for a while and he really made a good opportunity out of what he was given. Because the opportunity he was given is he helped out railroad companies a lot and pioneered timekeeping in America. Because he claimed that his observatory could give railroad companies the correct timetables between all of the different stations. So he was just delivering the messages between each of the stations to keep the correct timetables between all of them. And many railroad companies bought onto that. So he really got a lot of funding for himself and to mod out his observatory a lot for that time. And because of this development, it essentially helped implement time zones in the US. And a little later, he got a new interest, which would be in flying and aerodynamics, because he was reading the works of many major figures like Sir George Cayley. And in 1887, Langley became the third secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. That didn't stop him from continuing his aviation experiments. And around this time, he began to work on his aerodrome, but early on, he did not have that much success. And he did learn from his mistakes, however, and his fifth and sixth aerodromes did have some success, which got him, or the government gave him a large award of money for his successes. So President McKinley took a major interest in it, and he awarded Langley $50,000 to do more experiments, but on a grander scale. So Langley modified his launch method. He did more research on engines, and he adapted the aerodrome to actually fit a man inside of it. So after a few years and $70,000 later in 1903, he was finally ready to launch it. So on his houseboat that he had launched multiple of his aerodromes off of, it took off, but it almost immediately crashed into the water, which was not good whatsoever. So after a few adjustments, he tried again, but he had the same outcome. And this really took a toll on aviation as a whole because around the same time, the Wright brothers were developing their own aircraft, which had much more success than Langley's ever did. But because that the government decided to gamble all their chips on Langley, government got really scared of putting any more money into aviation. This was one of the reasons that aviation was very slowed in the U.S. compared to everywhere else in the world. And so, just some specifics on the aerodrome that I pulled from Langley's Aero Engine of 1903. So it states that a contemporary man-carrying powered airplane was developed by the Smithsonian Institution known as the Langley Aerodrome A, being less efficient aerodynamically than the Kitty Hawk Flyer, which is the Wright Flyer. It was abandoned after 2 unsuccessful launchings by catapult over the Potomac River during the last quarter of 1903. The engine, 52 horsepower, weighing 200 pounds, was the most advanced aeronautical design in the world at the turn of the century. So he did have that going for him. Then these are my sources right here, and that concludes the presentation.